Okay, we're going to have a little look at straps. Now I'm going to do this the wrong way around because I'm going to start with the strap pad. So this is an option, you don't have to do this. I just find that it's a lot easier to carry if it's got a comfortable strap. So we have our strap pad foam panel, and I'm using Styleville, so this is quite thick. If you're using a slightly thinner foam, you may find it easier to sew. This does make it quite thick to sew, so it is a little bit of a challenge. And what you may need to do is increase your needle size. I've actually popped a size 18 needle into my machine because I know that this is quite thick. This is my padded the piece that will go over the padded area, and that's my exterior fabric, and I've interfaced that. So I'm going to lay my foam centrally onto this fabric. So there's a 1/4 of an inch overlap on either side. Now I'm going to take that little bit of overlap, and I'm just going to fold it around my foam and clip it in place. It is only 1/4 of an inch, it's a very small amount. So you do need to be quite careful that you're not pushing it so far over that you've lost the overlay on the other side, which is what I do often, or you've lost the extra bit on the other side. So I'm just going to literally put that back where it meant to be, because I literally did exactly what I just told you not to do. To avoid that, what I try to do is do both sides at the same time, which is what I was trying to show you, but making a bit of a pig's ear of it. Be careful, you're not actually pushing in the foam itself, you're just pulling the fabric around. Now, if you find this is really difficult, you can make your fabric a little bit thick, a little bit wider if it feels too difficult to do. However, it does tend to add extra bulk to it if you add extra 1/2 an inch, which you don't really need, because this does get quite thick, this part. So I'm just going to fold in both sides. It's a bit fiddly, and you do need to kind of clip it each time you do, every sort of inch or so, just to make sure it stays in place. Okay, so once you've got that all clipped, what you should do is then baste down to hold that in place. Basting at, I mean, the biggest stitch length I've got on my machine is a 6, so that's the length I'm going to use to sew baste. Now I don't backstitch at the beginning and the ends, because I am going to remove these stitches. What I will say is that you need to sew baste as close to the raw edge as you possibly can of this fold that you've created. Taking the clips off as you go. Now, if you find that you can't, if you're not a fan of sew basting at this sort of distance from the raw edge, you could try using glue, or you could try using double-sided tape. I haven't actually tried either, but I think it probably could work, because I've always felt that it was easier to baste it. You will be removing these baste stitches afterwards, so if you think it might be confusing, if you're using a highly patterned fabric like I am, it might be actually easier to sew baste in a really brightly coloured thread, so you can see which are your basting stitches and which are your permanent stitches at a later point. So if you can see there, I've literally sew basted along the edge, very close to the edge of the raw edge of the fabric, and I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side. As close as I can to the raw edge of the fabric. Because there's not a great deal of fabric to be seen, oh, I don't even know what I did with it now. You can use an awl, or a great one for using my snips, to just hold the fabric in place, because I find that my fingers are too big to kind of hold it where it needs to be. Sometimes to just, certainly on this second side where it's kind of resisting and pushing against you because it's quite tight. This will actually depend on how thick your foam is as well, because a thinner foam will give you a little bit extra wiggle room. So there we go, both sides have been basted. Now I'm going to trim off the corners at about 45 degrees. So you can see I've taken the corners off. Now what I generally do is I will take this inside part and poke it down inside behind. It doesn't stay there, but you can actually put a little drop of glue on it. Inside behind before I pull this over. It just takes that little bit of bulk out. It's difficult to do with my finger there, so I'm just going to do it. I'll pop it in behind and I use something to poke it in, then pull that short end down and to the reverse, so to the wrong side, and clip it in place. Same on the other side. Push that bit in, then pull the additional seam allowance down, clipping both the corners because those are the bits that I like to ping out. And there we have it. I'm going to do exactly the same at the other end. So this is fiddly, but it is optional. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. I just think it makes it a lot more comfortable to carry. Rivet presses are heavy things, so having a comfortable handle on the bag that you use to carry it's got to be a bonus. I tend to make my handle quite long so that I can actually, if I want to, kind of carry it over my shoulder with the press underneath my arm. It's what suits you. So there we go. I have my two ends that have both been clipped and folded over, and I'm going to base stitch them in exactly the same way, as close to the raw edge as I possibly can, because I will be removing those stitches. This is just to hold it in place. So this is just a pad of foam that's been tightly upholstered in fabric, which has been basted in place. Okay. Now, when we come to our strap, now I've already done some of my pressing. My strap panel is 4 inches wide, and I have pressed in half right sides together. So I've pressed, which gives me a nice seam which shows the center of my strap. I then open up that strap and fold both of my raw edges, the long raw edges, into the center to the fold that I've already made, and press those in place. And then once they are in place, I can fold that in half, which will completely contain my raw edges, so they're completely enclosed within the strap. And you can clip that strap, and I've used 2 pieces of fabric to join together to make my strap, so because I like them quite long. It's very much your choice whether you want them longer or shorter. If you have them too short, then the handle of the press will get in the way as you try and carry them. So do be aware of where the press will sit in the bag before you decide that you want to cut them radically shorter. Ease of carrying is important with something like this because you don't really want to drop it. So I've clipped my strap and I'm now going to top stitch along the outside edges. You can see I'm using my fingers to act as a seam guide to make sure my strap stays straight. What I didn't do was check my bobbin, which I should do usually. When I do straps, I usually check my bobbin first because playing bobbin lottery with your thread is annoying at best. Okay, so we've done one line of stitching, and on the other side I'm going to go back to the end where I started, and I'm going to come straight back down in the same direction. And I do that to stop the fabric from warping. If you stitch from two different sides as you're doing your top stitching, you'll find that sometimes you get a warp in the fabric, which isn't attractive. There we go, one strap. So we're going to take our pad that we created and I'm going to lay it wrong sides up. I'm going to fold my strap in half. Now, because I've actually used two pieces of fabric to make my strap, I know where the centre is already because that's where my join is. And I am going to lay my strap centrally onto my pad so that it sits along the middle. So I'll have a bit of the pad sitting out either side. Now, if it makes you feel more comfortable, then you can pin at the ends just to make sure that that stays put. I generally don't because I like to be able to feel what I'm doing, and I'm not a great one for using pins if I can get away with it. It's also quite a lot of thickness to try and pin through, so not the easiest thing to pin. So you're going to need some clips, and what we're going to do is we are going to fold the sides of our pad around our strap. So as we did before, where we folded our fabric around our pad, we're now going to fold our pad around our strap. And as we fold it, we're going to clip it in place. Now you can imagine that this is now starting to get quite thick. So this is where you will need your bigger needle. To be fair, I probably didn't need to put my bigger needle in till I got to this point, but hey, better to be over eager. So I've done one side and now I'm going to do the other side. And what you should find is that the pad will meet in the middle. So you won't have a gap between one side and the other. You do have to be quite firm with this because the foam isn't really designed to be folded like this. It likes to try and get flat and it has standy uppiness, so it's looking to stand up and give that pad structure. But actually what we want is for it to give it padding, not structure at this point. There we go. So my pad is now completely clipped to my strap. And what I'm going to do is I am going to top stitch now, to stitch my, I'm not going to top stitch, I'm going to stitch my pad to my strap along the very edge, the outside edge of the pad. So inside of the area where I did my basting is sitting approximately 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. I'm going to sew on the inside of that. And this is thick. This will go through lots and lots of layers, so you will need a bigger needle and you will need to be patient and careful with it. So I'm just going to drop my needle down. Let's just just a couple of back stitches there. Going all the way from one end of our pad to the other, and then back stitch just a few stitches just to ensure that your stitching doesn't come undone. Get rid of any long threads. And then we're going to do the second side, and now if you can push your second side in so that it butts up against the first side. If it's come away a little bit, which it does sometimes, it's constantly fighting to become flat again, because that's what style builder and these sort of foams are designed to do. So it's not actually doing what it's meant to do. Again, I'm stitching as close to the fold as I possibly can. Lots of threads hanging off here where I was doing my basting, and I just left basting, just left the ends. A couple of back stitches at the beginning and the end. Right, now you can remove your basting stitches along the long lengths. I can remember being at school in my needlework classes and my needlework teacher saying, well, you must tack everything, and I can remember thinking to myself, what a ridiculous thing to do. Why would you sew everything twice? And I know that we don't call it tacking because we're doing it on a machine, but it is effectively tacking. It's just done on a machine. I suddenly hear my sewing teacher's voice in my head. I think she's long since passed away. She'd be mortified if she could see me doing what I do now. I wasn't the best student when it came to sewing classes. Now, if she'd wanted me to make a handbag instead of an oven glove or an apron, then I might have been uninspired. And I did say at the time, I can remember saying to her, I'll never ever sew anything, so why? I don't even know why you're bothering to teach me. And she more or less said she didn't know why she was bothering to teach me either, as she was putting me outside of the class. Hey ho. Little did I know. So just say removing the basting stitches. From that pad along the long length. Right, now having done the lengths, we're going to now stitch, and I generally stitching this from the right side along the shorter ends. Again, we're stitching within the gap between the basting stitches and the edges, the folded edges, and we will remove the basting stitches in a second. Now bear in mind that this is thick, so which is why I've put a much bigger needle in so that I can punch through the thickness. And again, you're going to remove the basting stitches because we don't need those. That's just what's holding it all together while we get rid of any stray threads you might have. And then the same at the other end. I find when it's really thick, the first stitch is better if I just hand wind my needle into my fabric. Go forward one, back one to lock it in. Back stitching a couple of stitches just to secure again. And then removing the basting. And whilst I've said before in previous videos, I don't do basting all the time when I probably should do. On this occasion, I haven't figured out a way that I can do this without basting. I find removing basting stitches probably the most boring thing ever, but I haven't come up with a way that I can do this without basting it first. So what you'll end up with is a nice padded thick area that's really comfortable on the hand or on the shoulder, that's on your strap. So that's the sort of grip part for your strap, and it's nice and solid. Now if you want to stitch down the very edges to make it a little bit less bulky on the sides, you can do, but I actually think that gives it a bit more comfort, so makes it fit into my hands nicer. So it's up to you. You can add an extra line of stitching if you really want to. It's perfectly secure with just the 2 lines of stitching centrally. It's very much your call. So we're going to move from here on to fitting our got some more threads there, fitting our strap onto our main exterior, and then we'll look at fitting our pockets. So we need to do that twice, obviously, because we need 2 straps. So repeat the same thing again.